This week, our theme has been Do the Most Important Thing, based on Jesus answering the question about the greatest commandment being to love God with all your heart and soul and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And this theme is consistent throughout the New Testament. In Paul's letter to the Romans in the 13th chapter, he says something very similar to Jesus in verses 8 through 10. He says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." And then he says some of the 10 Commandments, and then he says, and all these commandments are summed up in this word, love your neighbor as yourself, which leads to verse 10. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. If we had more time, we could trace throughout the New Testament how different writers and speakers, from Jesus to Paul here, to John in 1 John, to James, as you go throughout the New Testament, you see this thread of love being the most important foundational thing that you and I are called to as Christians. It really doesn't get any more basic than that. And love does no wrong to a neighbor. Now, in some ways, that's a negative way of stating it, right? But that's, in a sense, saying, well, the first thing is don't harm your neighbor. Don't cheat them. Don't steal from them. Don't blow your leaves from your yard onto their yard. Don't shovel the snow off the end of your driveway and put it at the end of theirs, right? We all say, well, of course we wouldn't do that, I hope. But love does no wrong to a neighbor. And then moving beyond that, love, Paul says, is the fulfilling of the law. So that's then moving to a more positive stance of, rather than thinking about, well, I don't want to do harm to my neighbor, how can I do good for my neighbor? How can I assist someone? And there's, I'm sure, all kinds of little, kind, practical things any of us can do to encourage or help our neighbor. We could leave a note in their door. We could bring them some flowers. We could bake something. We could call them to check on them. We could offer to help them with a physical task, depending on their life situation or our own. There's a variety of things that you and I can do to just share love with our neighbors. And by our neighbors, I mean literally your neighbors. We're called to love our neighbor, and that means first and foremost the people who live right around us. And it actually leads to better communities, to friendlier, safer, more welcoming communities when we know and our neighbors by name, and we know a little bit about their lives, and they know a little bit about us. So I encourage you, don't do any wrong to a neighbor. Keep those leaves to yourself, and try to think of something positive that you can do for one of your neighbors today.